Good morning and welcome to the 15th meeting in 2013 of the Health and Sport Committee. And as usual at this point in time, can I remind those present to switch off mobile phones and Blackberries, as they often interfere with our sound system. Witnesses and people in the public gallery may also notice that some members are using iPads just to remind that this is instead of hard copies of the committee papers. The first item on the agenda is to decide whether we take consideration of our draft report on victims and witnesses Scotland Bill in private at today's meeting and at future meetings. Our members agreed to take this in private. Thank you. Item number 2, which we now move to, is to take evidence from the UK Government Department of Health and value-based pricing. And can I welcome Katie Peters, Head of Pricing, Prescriptions and Supply Medicines, Pharmacy and Industry Group, Department of Health, UK Government. Welcome to you this morning. Can I invite you to make some opening remarks, and then we will move to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to make a short opening statement to set the scene. I hope the committee will find it useful. My name is Katie Peters, and I'm Head of Prescriptions, Pricing and Supply in the Medicines, Pharmacy and Industry Group at the Department of Health. What that name means is that I have policy responsibility for prescription charging in England, for medicine supply issues, and of course, the current pharmaceutical pricing regulation scheme and its successor arrangements, including value-based pricing. I know that this is an issue that keeps cropping up in your inquiry into access of newly licensed medicines, and I hope that I may be able to clarify the concept somewhat this morning. So, what is value-based pricing? Put simply, it will be a pricing system for new branded medicines where the price the NHS pays will be more closely linked to a medicine's assessed value in terms of improving outcomes for patients, taking into account wider societal benefits and factors such as the burden of illness. And in focusing on the value that a medicine brings to patients and society, we want to incentivise the development of more new, innovative and effective medicines, as manufacturers will be rewarded directly and comprehensively for the value their innovation brings to patients and society. As you've gathered from the evidence presented to you so far, the issue of medicines pricing in Scotland is a reserved matter for the UK government. Having a common branded medicines pricing policy across the UK allows us to maximise our bargaining power, and it provides a useful degree of consistency and stability for the pharmaceutical industry. But it is recognised, of course, that the devolved administrations largely determine their own health policies, including those affecting the use and availability of medicines within their health systems. And of course, it is entirely a matter for the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament what it spends its money on. That will not change under value-based pricing. The current pricing system for branded medicines, the Pharmaceutical Pricing Regulation Scheme, or PPRS, has provided stability and predictability over time for both industry and the NHS. But it was becoming increasingly clear that NHS patients were not always able to access the medicines they could benefit from because there was an insufficient link between pricing and value. That is why, in the 2010 Coalition Agreement, the UK government announced that it would move to a system of value-based pricing so that patients can better access the drugs and treatments their doctors think they need. Since then, we have publicly consulted on our proposals, engaged with a wide range of stakeholders, patients groups, clinicians, industry and other interested parties, through a series of technical workshops and update events, and we are now in formal negotiations with the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry, the ABPI, on aspects of the new pricing arrangements. These negotiations are confidential, and I hope you will understand that this means there may be some things that I am unable to talk about in much detail today. We still expect the new arrangements to be in place for January 2014. So that, Convener, is where we are.
Thank you very much. Can we move to Richard Simpson for the first question?
I think it arises out of your very last comment, and that is that the January 2014 is not very far away, and this committee and others like it have absolutely no idea of what's going to happen with value-based pricing. So my question to you is that, can you explain to me the advantages of value-based pricing over a combination of PPRS as revised, I think it was revised in 2009, with patient access schemes? Because that seemed to me to be a rational and reasonable modification of PPRS, which is a system that has served us well for well over 50 years, and served us well not only in terms of the supply of medicines, until recently with the new, quite expensive innovative medicines being very expensive, and was the reason for the PAS scheme coming in, but also recognizes that stability is necessary to maintain an industry which is one of the very few that has a balance of payment surplus for the United Kingdom. So this is a very important industry for the United Kingdom, and clearly what we must achieve surely is a stable situation which maintains their role in providing the economy with substantial benefits. So the central question is, what are the advantages that you see of VBP over PPRS combined with PAS?
So I apologise for the acronyms. The PPRS has provided stability and predictability over time. However, it has not always provided access to medicines. And the way that medicines are appraised within the English system does occasionally lead to a situation where not all aspects of their value is rewarded. So, for example, the current system doesn't always take systematic accounts of certain effects that we think should be reflected more systematically. So, the sorts of issues that we have mentioned in our consultation document are issues like wider societal benefits. We do not systematically currently appraise medicines on the impacts they have on things such as employment effects, tax revenue effects, spending effects. So there is a set of benefits that medicines can bring that we are not consistently appraising, which are broader than health benefits. Also, if you look at the health benefits that medicines can bring, some health benefits may be more important or more valued by society than other types of health benefits. So again, in health, at the end of somebody's life, is something we may well be prepared to pay more for than a kind of accrued quality-adjusted life year assessment, accrued assessment of just net health gain. So there are some types of health gain that may be more important than others, which we want to see reflected in what we describe as the burden of illness, the amount of health that someone has foregone. So essentially, within value-based pricing, we're considering paying more for the medicines that bring the health gains that society values. So when someone is severely ill, being prepared to pay more to treat medicines that can address those issues.
That's very helpful indeed, although we are having a review of the Scottish Medicines Consortium at the moment. And part of that is actually a greater public involvement and also looking at issues such as another one which you didn't mention, which was the effect upon carers, for example. So, but I entirely agree with what you're saying, that element of social and societal benefit does need to be brought in. But I'm concerned that we're getting rid of the PPRS at the same time. I gather there is a successor PPRS apart from NAS, from new active substances, but the successor PPRS, will that include the sort of limitations on profit, on advertising, etc., which are contained within the PPRS and are part of the stability the industry needs?
As we set out in the consultation document, the system that we're looking to introduce has value-based pricing for new medicines and then a successor to the PPRS for existing medicines. We published a joint statement with the ABPI in August last year where we set out that the PPRS would be evolving but similar to the current PPRS. Now, one of the reasons we put the joint statement out was to create greater stability about what was likely to be included in the future arrangements. Now, the exact details of what the successor PPRS looks like is clearly part of the negotiations at the moment. And of course, and I apologise, I suspect I may be saying this a few times, but because those negotiations are confidential, I can't go into the ins and outs of what may or may not be raised by different sides then. But the joint statement that we published in August, I think, may be very helpful if people want further information in terms of what the successor arrangements for the PPRS are likely to look like.
That's very helpful. Just one final question, and a very quick one. Is it the intention in terms of the structures to have a new structure looking at value-based pricing in addition to NICE and Scottish Medicines Consortium? My interest here is that, of course, the SMC is a different system to NICE. SMC will look at all medicines that the industry refers to it, whereas NICE at the moment only takes referrals from your department and minister. So there are two different systems in existence at the moment. And I'm really not clear, and I wonder how the relative roles of the new VBP system, together with NICE and SMC, will actually fit together.
Clearly, the role and the remit of the SMC is determined by the Scottish Government. So in terms of value-based pricing and how we expect value-based pricing to operate, in some ways there will be an HTA component and a pricing component. And we have announced that NICE will do the bulk of the HTA process for England. So we've always said, and we said in the consultation document, that NICE would do the basic pharmacoeconomic assessment. The recent announcement was essentially that it would be assessing all components of the value-based system. So those issues I mentioned earlier in terms of things like wider societal benefits and burden of illness and therapeutic improvement innovation, how that will all fit together. So we have announced that NICE will pull together for England all those assessments. And in some ways, I suspect the system will not look that different to the current system, whereby currently NICE makes an assessment of the clinical and cost effectiveness of the medicine, taking account some additional factors on occasions. In the new system, we will have, I suspect, an HTA process that's a little bit more, even more rigorous, taking account of a broader range of factors, such as the ones I've mentioned earlier.
There won't be a separate VVP. That'll be part of NICE. NICE will take that on board.
Yes, we have announced that NICE will be...
See, that gives me a problem, because the SMC is faster, it is highly regarded, and on a worldwide basis, the speed is actually something of great importance to us up here. And if we're now going to have to wait for a VBP from NICE, which is a much slower process, even with the new requirements that have been placed on it by the Minister in England, it is still going to be much slower than in Scotland, as far as I can judge. So I have some real concerns about that. So my final question is, what discussions have you had with the officials in Scotland about the perceived interaction between SMC and the new system?
Can I actually address this point about the speed insofar as it's sort of my place to discuss it in Scotland? One of the things we said in the joint statement in August is we are expecting medicines to have freedom of price at launch. So our expectation is that a company can propose the price as it currently does within the structures of the PPRS, so there is freedom to make an assessment on the basis of that price. So that price will be available quite soon and quite quickly, as it is under the current system. So that bit of the system does not change, based on what we said on in the joint statement. So we won't have to wait for an HTA process out of NICE before a price becomes available throughout the UK. So as I say, much of the system may not look that different to the current system. So that's the question about pricing and speed in Scotland. Now, obviously, it's for the Scottish Government to determine how it wants the SMC to respond to any such price. Now, in terms of the discussions we've had with Scottish officials, we've had substantial discussion. We've always had substantial discussions with Scottish officials on a large range of issues, not just pricing issues. So one of the things I mentioned in my opening statement was a series of technical workshops we had, and officials either from the Scottish Government or from SMC or from both were invited to all of those. in addition to that, there are a large number of sort of bilateral discussions that we have on a large range of issues, including the negotiations, including value-based pricing, but not just constrained to those issues.
Thanks. Bob Doris?
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. I was looking at the consultation paper on value-based pricing from the English Department of Health, and the ministerial forward that says there must be a much closer link between the price that NHS pays for the value that the medicine delivers, and one of the objectives within the consultation paper is to ensure value for money and best use of NHS resources. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. There's perhaps a gap in it for me, which would be it's not just the use of NHS resources, but the use of, say, local authority resources as well, because of the social care needs that are assessed depending on whether or not a drug is or is not available. Could you tell me what discussions you've had with local authorities to get them to input as to how value-based pricing could save them money in the future, or the modelling work that's part of that?
Okay. We've done a lot of modelling on VBP, including a much broader range of values. At the very heart of VBP is this idea of taking account of a broader set of effects. I've mentioned things like employment effects, but also part of that is the effect on the social care system, and also the effect on carers, the amount of informal care that happens at the moment. And when a medicine can affect the amount of informal care or the amount of social care that is happening within the system, that should absolutely be reflected in the price. At the technical workshops, we described how this might happen. There has been sort of discussions through the public consultation. The views were expressed on this issue as well. So that's one route that we've had for engaging with local authorities. But absolutely at the core of value-based pricing is this idea that you should take account of all components of the benefits that a medicine can bring, which absolutely includes social care, privately funded social care, publicly funded social care, and informal care as well.
Have you spoken to COSLA, for example, to solicit their views on value-based pricing?
I'm not explicitly aware of whether COSLA is one of the organisations that we've discussed. But if you look on the website, we have a list of all the organisations that express views on value-based pricing as part of the consultation.
COSLA is the umbrella organisation for Scotland's 32 local authorities, and if we're going to get an accurate picture of how value-based pricing would fit in with the Scottish policy context, I would hope there would be a statutory consultee within that process. So perhaps it would be useful if you could tell me whether the Department of Health in England directly contacted COSLA on this, or, and forgive me, I don't know the name of the umbrella group for local authorities in England. Have you had any direct discussions with the local authority umbrella group in England in relation to value-based pricing? Because for me to get this right, it's essential that you have those discussions.
We have engaged with a lot of our colleagues in social care in the UK about this issue. We have not, that I'm aware of, but I will check when I'm in London, the detail of the public organisations we have consulted with. In England, in the UK government, for England, social care is dealt with through the Department of Health, and so that's how we've been channeling those discussions. As part of the consultation, there were certainly opportunities for organisations to raise those issues, and the modelling work has definitely engaged on those issues as well. We've also obviously discussed value-based pricing with NICE, and of course NICE's remit now includes social care as well.
I thank you for your answer, and it's with genuine respect that I say I get a feeling that you're perhaps missing the Scottish policy framework in terms of the vital role of Scottish local authorities. I would have expected the Department of Health to make direct representations to them, and I think that could be a fundamental flaw if we're going to get value-based pricing right and how it impacts on Scotland. But I'm sure the committee would welcome more information in relation to that. Now, you did mention modelling work. Now, as you're aware, this committee is doing an inquiry into the access to new medicines, and there has been a Scottish Government review in relation to that process as well. As you would expect, pharmaceutical companies speak to individual MSPs and they speak to the committee in relation to their views on that. I've consistently asked any pharmaceutical company that's spoken to me, I've asked them about value-based pricing. One of the things I've said to them is currently, when you put your evidence towards NICE or SMC under the current system, do you do any health modelling work as to what the social care benefits would be in terms of the pounds and pence? And to date, and I'm willing for any pharmaceutical companies that have met with me, and I get this wrong, none of them have done that. So could you explain to me in a bit more detail the modelling work that's been done to elicit what the social care savings could be for certain drugs? Because I'm unclear how that modelling work can be done without actually speaking to local authorities themselves.
Okay. In terms of the modelling work we've done, we discussed this at various technical workshops that the ABPI and member companies were invited to and attended. So they have seen this work. The type of issues that we have looked at are, you set a framework for wider societal benefits in terms of the individual, other sort of people in society, so friends and family, and then the impact that then has on government revenues and all aspects of government revenues. So, as I said, including things like employment impacts, tax impacts, spending impacts, and different types of spending impacts. So what impact could a medicine have on social care bills? And that then, as I say, is subdivided into impacts on informal carers, impacts on public funding, and then impacts on private funding. And so you can break down, you can provide a framework which allows you to assess how a medicine could have an impact on different aspects of social care. What we then did is do essentially a literature review on what evidence is there out there in terms of how big these effects are. Now, how such a system in practice will operate will critically depend on the medicines that are brought forward by companies. So whether in 2014, 2015, 2016, medicines are demonstrating social contributions to reducing the burden on social care will critically depend on those medicines. And it will in part depend on the evidence that is produced by companies. But certainly the framework that we set out in the technical workshops allows for a much more detailed calculation of social care and the different aspects of social care.
I genuinely appreciate that, but what I'm trying to understand is when you feed those numbers on the social care bill in Scotland into any modelling you've got, how can you feed those numbers in unless you speak to Scotland's local authorities and ask them what their social care bills are? So, I'm not trying to be awkward, I'm just trying to make sure that you're taking specific account of the Scottish public policy situation. For example, we have a national carer strategy. For example, we have free personal care for the elderly. For example, we've got a change fund for older people. All across the board, there's a different policy framework in Scotland, and I just want to make sure that when you're looking about the on-cost or on-savings of social care and you feed those numbers in, you're actually speaking to Scotland's local authorities and you're using numbers in a Scottish context, and I'm unsure as to how you're able to achieve that.
I'm absolutely happy to discuss, partly through my colleagues in the Scottish Government, what is the appropriate forum for such a dialogue. But one thing I would say is it will continue to be for Scotland how it funds and its arrangements for social care. But we are absolutely happy to discuss with Scottish colleagues in the government what is the appropriate way for such a dialogue to take place.
I may come back in later for some more questions, but I feel like my colleagues will want to ask some, but thank you for that.
Aileen McLeod.
Thanks very much, Convener. I mean, obviously, from some of the evidence that the committee has taken on our current inquiry surrounding the access to new medicines, I mean, there have been concerns as to what the implications of the value-based pricing system would be for the SMC's appraisal system. So it was really just to kind of ask, you know, the kind of discussions that you've had with SMC, what contributions that they've been making, because I understand that Professor Angela Timmy of the SMC was actually speaking at a recent meeting where apparently she closed with a slide of the Loch Ness Monster, which she claimed that she might find before she found value-based pricing.
There's, as I said, been sort of ongoing discussions about value-based pricing with colleagues from Scotland and with the SMC. We've had a series of meetings at which different organisations have been present. We've had a series of workshops on things like how the research that underlies the assessment of some of these components like burden of illness and therapeutic innovation and improvement could possibly be measured, and there have been invites to the SMC on these issues and attendance at a lot of these technical workshops, and then there's been follow-up material presented to them. I mean, the SMC is a hugely respected organisation, and as such we really value their views, their approach, their thoughts about how this could operate. We've also, because we've now made this announcement that NICE will be taking forward the bulk of the HTA process, and NICE is very good at consulting with a wide range of stakeholders. I think there will be plenty of opportunity there as appropriate to engage with the SMC, and indeed there is dialogue between the SMC and NICE already about a huge range of HTA issues. So there have been plenty of opportunities to engage. I think there will continue to be plenty of opportunities to engage. But this is not a simple area, and so it is absolutely right that we make sure there is time and opportunity of different organisations to engage and understand how this affects their roles.
And in terms of the NHS, you know, NHS in Scotland, I mean, I've obviously been consulting with NHS in England, but, you know, what's been their role in terms of the consultation so far? I mean, how's their involvement been working in terms of the discussion?
Okay. We have routed the discussions to the Scottish Government officials, so we've had a lot of discussions in terms of, as I say, these issues around value-based pricing, how it will be taken forward, and also the negotiations on price, both about value-based pricing aspects of the negotiation and about the success of the PPRS. So there have been a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion, primarily routed through Scottish officials.
And obviously, in terms of the review that we've been conducting, there's been one of the recommendations from Professor Routledge was in terms of setting up like citizens' juries and citizen panel. I wondered, just in terms of the patient groups in Scotland, which ones you've been consulting with as well?
We've had a large engagement with patient groups. Some of them present themselves as UK patient groups. So, for example, Myeloma is Myeloma UK, although based in Edinburgh. We have had a huge amount of engagement with the patient organisations. So first of all, through the consultation, there were a large number of responses for them. We've had individual meetings with individual organisations. We've met some of the broader alliances. One of the workshops we set up was specifically to engage the patient organisations. We also had a workshop specifically on inequalities issues, which we thought was particularly important to engage the patient organisations on, and they have been very helpful in terms of making us understand the impact of the policy and the sort of questions we need to debate on the policy.
Nate Millen.
Just to follow on from that, ahead of this meeting, we received a briefing paper from Prostate Cancer UK, and I mean, they still feel, I mean, to summarise what they said, is that the Department of Health in Westminster has not consulted patient organisations meaningfully on the proposed changes, and what they say is few details are available about how VBP will work in practice and how the proposed weights for wider societal benefits, burden of illness and therapeutic innovation will be combined, which continues to prevent meaningful engagement. Can you comment on that? Because they obviously have significant concerns about end-of-life, prioritising end-of-life drugs, and concerned about the impact of proposals to prioritise drugs which would help people return to work. And they feel that the patient voice still is not strong enough in appraisals of new medicines.
I think there are several issues that are important in terms of understanding the role of the patient in terms of even the current system value-based pricing. One of the things that we've said about value-based pricing is that we will use the QALY within it in terms of assessing the medicine. And the quality adjusted life year, the QALY, is drawn from patients' assessment across a broad range of diseases. And one of the great things about the QALY is it allows you to compare the impact on health across a lot of different diseases. So the QALY is absolutely at the heart of what we expect to be delivered through value-based pricing. So that is a core role for engaging a very broad range of patients and making sure that the impact that a medicine has on a broad range of patients is reflected in the future system. Now, in terms of the debates we've had and with various different patient organisations, as I say, we've discussed this issue with many of them. One of the things we have done is invited them to a lot of these workshops. We haven't been able to invite absolutely everyone because they're highly technical and we actually had slightly limited spaces. But there has been a lot of dissemination of information from those workshops to the patient organisations. There is an issue that has been raised with us is the treatment of end of life. Currently in England, NICE have an explicit end of life adjustment that can be applied. And one of the things we are looking at is when we talk about this concept of burden of illness, how end of life is appropriately reflected in burden of illness. So there are lots of mechanisms for making sure we pick up the issues that are affecting people with prostate cancer through the consultation process and through the mechanics of calculating a value-based price.
It struck me during the course of this conversation that could the results that you're hoping to achieve with value-based pricing, could that not be achieved by changing the modifiers or altering the modifiers, for instance, that the SMC use in judging, the criteria they use in judging new medicines without having to change the complete system?
I think a lot of the way that value-based pricing is likely to be implemented is through the HTA process. We are discussing with NICE what's appropriate for England. In many ways, as I said earlier, the system may not look that different to the current system. So I think much of this will be taken forward, certainly in the English context, in terms of how NICE does its role, plays its part, is through changing the details of the HTA process. Now, whether the Scottish Government wishes the SMC to adopt a similar approach in terms of making decisions about use and access of medicines in Scotland is absolutely a question for the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government.
Thank you for that.
Can I ask some questions in regards to the confidentiality of the negotiations? And I presume that the appropriate minister and UK government has been kept up to date about all of the negotiations, what stage they're at, what progress has been made, what are the barriers, etc., etc. So has there been any engagement between the UK government minister and the Scottish and Welsh equivalents to bring them up to date, minister to minister?
There have been, it's a bit difficult because we're now getting into debates about confidential letters that are being exchanged between ministers.
I don't think I'm asking about the detail. I'm just asking whether it's been seen as appropriate, given that the UK minister has this information, that is shared on a minister-to-minister basis between the UK department and these equivalent ministers in Wales and Scotland. Not the detail.
Okay. There have certainly been exchanges of letters about the issue of medicines pricing.
Pardon?
Yes, of course. There has certainly been an exchange of letters about medicines pricing.
Which
discusses the issues that we're addressing here. Yes, absolutely.
Recent have been those letters been?
I don't have the date of the latest letters with me. There's also, as I say, been discussions with officials in the Scottish Government, and to some extent it's for them to make decisions.
Month?
Certainly not within the last month that I'm aware of.
Last 2 months.
Are we planning to run an auction here? Certainly not within the last 2 months.
Recently?
There is... I would need to check what's appropriate to share with this committee in terms of what you feel is right for Scottish Government ministers to, in terms of internal communications. I do understand that a meeting with your Cabinet Secretary has been set up for July.
And who requested that meeting?
My impression, because this is done in terms of correspondence between offices, my impression this was a request for this specific meeting did come from your Cabinet Secretary's office.
And in terms of the involvement of the SMC, have the SMC raised, given that they've got concerns about Loch Ness monsters and whether whether these negotiations are going too fast or too slow, has there been any concerns raised by the SMC in the various workshops or by communication of the delay, lack of involvement in that process, or criticism in the current process?
I would not say that they've raised criticisms. They have raised a set of entirely sensible questions about the process and issues and impact on Scotland. So a set of questions about the principles in general and a set of questions about what sort of impact this might have in the Scottish system.
No questions raised about the delay or lack of information. Or...
I'm not aware of any, no.
Thank you. The impact, I'm just trying to, as a layperson here, I'm just starting to think about what impact that value-based pricing would have on the Scottish system. What benefit would that be to that person who is seeking, or those people who are seeking access to new drugs and medicines? How would the value-based pricing ensure that there was greater or better access?
The core of value-based pricing is being able to pay higher prices for medicines that deliver value for patients. So, by explicitly adjusting for things like wider societal benefits, the impact on the care system, that gives the scope for higher prices, and this may encourage medicines to be available in the UK that deliver higher value and would not have been available under the current system.
So the SMC, NICE would operate that south of the border, and you would envisage SMC operating taking some of the work that you have done over the piece, and studies and workshops and whatever, some of the conclusions, and taking that and using that here in Scotland through the SMC, or not?
We would be more than happy to share with the SMC, I think we have shared with the SMC, the details of the technical work that we have done in terms of developing a possible value-based pricing model. And if the SMC, with the support of the Scottish Government and the Scottish Government, wanted to reflect that in its HTA process, that would absolutely be, we would have absolutely no objection to that whatsoever. But that would, as I say, be a question for the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament.
But they could take that work now and draw from that work. That work's been, they could draw from that work now,
yes,
and make progress on that if they wished, yes, themselves, couldn't they?
Yes, I mean, there have been the series of technical workshops which they have attended, and if they wanted to take that information and develop their own system using that work, we would have no difficulty with that.
So if they were concerned that you were not going to meet your date of January 2014, they could take matters into their own hands?
The January 14 date is quite a broad date. It's not simply the HTA aspects of value-based pricing. There are broader sets of issues like the negotiations on the PPRS and its successor arrangements. So the pricing aspects would be covered by the negotiations. And I don't think the SMC could take that into their own hands because it's a reserved matter. It's, of course, for the SMC to take any material that we've provided to them and use that as they think appropriate, but presumably in line with what their agreements with the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament.
This is probably the daft question, but it's just in my mind that the procurement process and the buying of drugs can be, that's the health service, is it not?
The decision about whether to buy a medicine at a given price is a decision for Scotland. Yeah.
Thank you. Richard Simpson, just check the other committee members if any of them want in. They haven't been in, and I'll go back to some of the people that have been in. Richard Simpson.
Yeah. I think
Yes.
I think one of the difficulties I'm having around this is what the difference between the modifiers which are developing in Scotland, which include all these issues, although perhaps there hasn't been an emphasis on employability and tax take. I think that those two have not been stressed in the past and are interesting, particularly employability in relation to rheumatoid arthritis drugs, which are the new biologic drugs there, which are expensive. But it seems to me that, you know, at the end of the day, that people are going to make value judgments on the weighting that is given to these societal aspects. So my question is really, have you in any of the modelling, and is it publicly available, what weights will be given or could be given, how these weights will be determined to these different aspects, and by whom they're going to be determined?
So we said that the pricing negotiations is something that happens between the industry and the government, but the issues around these very core societal judgments about what matters and what we should be prepared to pay for. So, you know, critical questions like, are we prepared to pay for more for people when they're towards the end of life, is something that we have addressed through, in part through technical workshops. We've engaged very broadly on this. We commissioned some specific research from the University of Sheffield to look at what is society's views on these issues. We've always said that such research is to inform and not determine any pricing scheme. Clearly, any pricing scheme has to be affordable. Therefore, we've done quite a lot of engagement in terms of the evidence base. We have now said that we would like NICE we've now said that NICE will be responsible for the overall framework, and they will be developing the overall framework for the HTA process within England, and they will consult as appropriate within their normal patterns.
In one sense, we have been here before in the Oregon approach to drugs, where they went out to the public. And of course, one of the responses, which was interesting, was that the HIV drugs should not be purchased, because there was almost a moral judgment being made by the public that this was a group that shouldn't be, where it shouldn't be paid. So if one got new drugs for treating drug addiction, which may well come along, expensive vaccinations, for example, you know, if the public as a whole are going to have a significant weight in making judgments, we could end up with the creation of, you know, of a moral judgmental approach. So I'm concerned about the balances that we strike here.
The role of the patient, I think, is absolutely key in terms of part involvement with the quality. It's why the quality adjusted life year is so useful, because that's a very systematic way of assessing what it is that a broad range of patients want to see reflected. We have engaged in various parts of literature research. We've also engaged in some sort of original research through Sheffield, looking at public preferences. But as I said, we did this to inform and not dictate or determine the pricing. So there will still be a filter in terms of the HTA process, whereby a large number of people will be looking at possible weights to make sure that we're not producing anything counterintuitive, to make sure it's explicable, and to absorb some of those sort of moral questions that you yourself have raised.
Have you tried out any citizens' jury system or equivalent, I mean, in terms of the participation of the public?
We haven't done a citizens' jury approach. We did a large survey of the public to get a take of their views on these things like burden of illness and therapeutic improvement and innovation.
And the advantage of a citizens' jury approach is that they are properly briefed, that there is, you know, that there is a proper analysis and evidential basis presented to the jury before they make their decision. So is that a system that's being considered or not?
It's not one we're actively considering it. I would say this research we commissioned did endeavour to set out quite a lot of information for people participating in the survey and the type of questions we asked them about. So it was an attempt to brief people who participated in that survey. But we wanted quite a large sample, and that's why we went for the survey methodology.
Combination of them both is probably the way to go, but thank you.
I wouldn't rule it out going forward, but it's not something we've done so far.
Thank you.
Gil Patterson?
Back to consultation. Can you inform the committee if you have had face-to-face meetings with institutions that are interested in this issue in England? To
Yes.
consult on. So you have had.
Yeah.
Can you describe the organisations that you've been involved in?
There are quite a lot of organisations.
Two would be fine.
So we have engaged with, clearly, pharmaceutical industries, patient organisations, both kind of representative bodies and individual interest patient organisations. We've engaged with the NHS extensively. We've engaged with NICE, obviously. We've discussed the issue with NICE. And then we've discussed, and I've been up to Edinburgh previously to discuss with the Scottish Government how this might operate in order to get their views.
To be frank, I find that your answers, maybe I'm wrong, but when it comes to consultation with the same interested parties in Scotland, it seems a bit sketchy. Maybe I'm wrong. Could you inform us on exactly when and who you engaged with in Scotland, and was it to the same degree? I mean, this is a reserved matter, and of course, in many ways, we're very much in Westminster's hands on this. So my expectation, or this committee's expectation, is that you would duly consult to the same degree, but it's not coming over that way, to be quite honest with you.
I mean, a lot of the, as I said, the patient organisations that we discuss the issue with are UK patient organisations. So, and they have actually quite regularly, one of the issues that does come over a lot in terms of the consultation we have is how this works in the different devolved administrations. So we have regularly discussed with the UK reps how this might operate. And of course, we have explained the system in which pricing is a reserve question, and then the aspects about how Scotland spends Scottish money is, of course, for the Scottish Government, Scottish Parliament to determine. So it is true that industry have shown a lot of enthusiasm to engage with us on this issue, but we have tried to engage a much broader range of organisations, and one of the reasons we did the workshops was to make sure that a large number of organisations who were interested in this issue had an opportunity to express views. And, you know, that's why we ran a full public consultation with over 180 organisations expressing their views on it.
And these include, I know you use the phrase UK institutions. This is the UK in that regard, but specific, since it is specific to Scotland, I'm asking about people you engaged with pro rata in Scotland. And I recollect in your introduction that you were saying that you have many meetings with officials in Scotland, and these matters were involved in that. My question is relating to specifically this, not in the general meetings that would happen all the time with between devolved governments and the UK or the London government and its departments, specifically on this, meetings taking place between the government and the Westminster officials in the health department?
There have been a large number of meetings between officials from the UK government and from the Scottish government specifically on pricing. At these we discuss, a lot of the time is spent discussing value-based pricing, impact on Scotland, also the successor arrangements of the PPRS. So there's a lot of time is spent on these issues, but there are other issues we discuss as well. So things like the security of supply of medicines is something that has also been discussed in some of these meetings. But I would say the vast majority of the time in the meetings has been spent so far on the issues around value-based pricing and the successor arrangements of the PPRS.
Yeah, thanks very much.
May be helpful if the committee could have a summary of those meetings, because the previous Cabinet Secretary was expressing a confidence that this would happen, did happen. I don't know whether this is a recent, it's tapered off. We all start off with good intentions. There's a lot of engagement and it tapers away. I don't know. But it would be helpful, I think, for the committee to have a summary of the meetings, the range of subjects that were discussed, and indeed to establish whether there's been a consistency there and a commitment to that. I think that would be helpful. It would also be helpful if we could have a link to the survey that you mentioned earlier, if we've not got that, in terms of, because I think that this is something that's been introduced in evidence in access to medicines about society opinion and indeed in the recommendations that before the committee, so it would be maybe interesting to have some of that as well. Bob Doris?
Thanks, Convener. It might also be quite helpful just to get a flavour, because we're talking about a consultation. Of course, it's right that we should be asking about the details of that consultation. It might be quite useful if you could give the committee a list of not just all the respondents to the consultation, but there'll be statutory consultees who the Department have directly contacted, so we can see who were directly contacted and to see if there were any omissions. And perhaps we could have got that information before today as well. We haven't got that, but we would find it very helpful if you could provide that as well. There does seem maybe there's an unavoidable impression, because NICE are understandably working hand in glove with the Department of Health to roll out value-based pricing, that the SMC is not as closely involved in that process as they could be, and they may have to wait to a degree, and we'll find out no doubt from the SMC in due course. They may have to wait till value-based pricing emerges and then respond to it. So there's maybe a nervousness there. Is that a reasonable nervousness to suggest?
I mean, clearly SMC is a hugely respected organisation. We really respect their views. They've been involved in a lot of the events. We're more than happy to have sort of additional conversations with them. It's just a little bit tricky for me from London to come along and lecture SMC about what it should and shouldn't do, which is why I'm just slightly nervous, but we're more than happy to engage with the SMC. And we would strongly encourage the SMC to engage with NICE about the specific HTA issues.
Maybe I didn't clarify what my question was, and it wasn't actually a substantive question. It was an impression I had when I was making some other comments, that if NICE are going to deliver value-based pricing in England, and they will do, but they're also directly part of the process of developing value-based pricing, and SMC are another organisation who will deliver value-based pricing in Scotland. However, they're not an integral part of the development of value-based pricing. Do they start, if you like, behind in terms of preparation? Is there a way where SMC could have been a more integral part of that process? I don't know SMC's views on this. I'm just merely asking the question.
I think it will always be possible to reflect back afterwards and think, could we have done this differently? And that's true of any policy, I think. We are very keen and have been very keen, and one of the reasons we ran so many workshops and actually got accused of consultation fatigue by certain organisations, that to engage with as many stakeholders as we could on this issue. We're very keen for SMC to be involved as they see fit. But it's, in some ways, we don't want to step on the toes of the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, but if people want them to engage, I'm sure that that can be facilitated.
I'm sure the Scottish Government's up for partnership work if they're asked. Can I ask a few questions in relation to what will happen once value-based pricing comes in? I think Dr Simpson was making some comments on that, and I want to make sure I understood it properly. The point was raised that the SMC makes decisions quickly with strong evidence and is a world leader in respect of approving medicines in that respect. And you seem to suggest that after value-based pricing, if there's a longer process by which to set that value-based price, whatever that may be, that the SMC could, in the interim, continue to use the current system of QALYs with modifiers to set an interim price? Interim price to accept or to approve or otherwise based at a price put forward by a drugs company.
So drugs companies will maintain freedom of pricing at launch within the constraints of some sort of the pricing agreement, and SMC will have the opportunity to make an assessment of that price based on the Scottish system in its current way. I do not see why anything to do with value pricing would change that. Nice.
Drugs company goes to launching a drug. Drugs available. If it's safe to use, if you can pay for it, you can use it. But would like it to be available on NHS in various nations and regions of the UK. The drugs company goes through the value-based pricing system, works through whatever the mechanisms are within that. But they also think this could take 6 months. But I could get an approval or otherwise from the SMC in 2 months. You're discussing with drugs companies this all the time. Have they said to you whether they'd be likely to put an application in the interim into the SMC or just wait for the longer period at a UK level?
They haven't raised the issue about the SMC, that explicit issue with us, no.
Right.
But as I said, because we have said that there will still be freedom of pricing as set out in the joint statement. As I said, the system doesn't change that much, so it'll be for the SMC will be able to take that price and make an assessment of whether it's a good use of Scottish money to buy that medicine at that price.
Yes, but that's before it's been through the modelling work of value-based pricing at a UK level. And what I'm asking you, I mean, I'd be surprised if this didn't come up within discussions with the industry. There's a new drug going to launch. You can get it privately. Would like the NHS to have this new drug. Are they going to put a submission into SMC and put a submission into the UK value-based pricing model at the same time, knowing that the SMC one could be 3, 4, 5 months quicker, so that to get their drug across Scotland speedier? Is that something they've said they're likely to do?
We haven't had that sort of debate. We're not anticipating I think you used the expression, UK value-based price authority.
Well, I can only apologise if my terminology is wrong. Yeah.
No, it's a complex issue, so it's worth it. We don't see there being a kind of sort of HTA imposed on a UK basis. What we envisage is that NICE for England will undertake the full value-based pricing assessment. And so, as I said, the system doesn't look that different from the current system. So a company launches price under freedom of pricing as set out in joint statement. There is a price there, it exists. SMC then makes its assessment. NICE makes its assessment. SMC uses the framework that is set for it. NICE uses the framework that's set for it for the English system. And so the speed with which those processes happen may very well look like they currently are. We're not expecting the assessment process by NICE to take significantly longer under a value-based pricing system. So there is no need for the NICE process to take any longer, and there's no requirement given there's a price out there, there's freedom of pricing. We do that to make sure the UK is a sort of an early launch market, so the SMC can take that information and take the price and do its assessment. So as I say, the system does not look in some ways that different from the current system.
This may be my misunderstanding, Ms Peters. I want to check. The reference price of drugs is a reserved issue at a UK level, and the value-based pricing model will be a UK model, and it will go through NICE. So there will be an element of any pricing which will have to go through value-based pricing as laid down by the Department of Health in conjunction with NICE.
Pricing, I think this is complicated. I know that when I took up the role, I spent quite a lot of time thinking through these processes. So the pricing aspect is reserved. So the PPRS, so issues like, is there freedom of pricing? Under the PPRS, do we have profit control? Do we have price profiles? Those sorts of questions are the reserved questions. So this question about, is there freedom of pricing at launch, is a reserved matter. There is then separate bits of the process which operate at devolved administration level and at England level. So there is the HTA aspect of the system operates at an English level. So NICE makes an assessment based on sort of English patterns. And you know, the SMC makes assessments based on, you know, the remit set for it, and, you know, Scottish, presumably Scottish take-up, Scottish disease prevalence, etc. So the HTA process and the how you spend the money is a devolved matter. And, you know, there will be, and we don't envisage that changing under value-based pricing. As I say, the system may look very, very similar to the current one.
Yeah, now, I think my lack of clarity might be because there has been a bit of an information gap through this process whilst discussions are ongoing, and I suspect it's something the committee is going to want to return to, because there does seem to be an information gap in the public domain. These assurances sound good, but we can't really touch, feel or smell it, because we just don't know what's going to happen, and I think that's the nervousness that many of us around this table have.
I mean, one of the things we did actually address in the joint statement again is the role of the devolved administrations, and how essentially that we were not expecting much change. And again, one of the things that you might find useful is I'll send you a copy of the joint statement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nanette Millen, do you want to come back in?
I was just thinking of some of the availability of some of the cancer drugs, where in England patients have benefited from the Cancer Drugs Fund, which we don't actually have in Scotland. How do you see value-based pricing affecting, well, initially the sort of patients who would benefit from future drugs coming in that would qualify under the Cancer Drugs Fund, and how do you see that impacting, or do you see that impacting on Scottish patients? Same sort of way.
Okay, so England introduced the Cancer Drug Fund. It's proved popular. Something like over 28,000 patients have benefited from it in England. It's a time-limited fund, so it's not we have not made any statement about what happens beyond the 3 years of the main Cancer Drug Fund. And, you know, discussions are ongoing about what is the future of the Cancer Drug Fund. It has become the responsibility of NHS England to manage the Cancer Drug Fund. So one of the things we will need to do is consider their views in terms of what is the future path for the Cancer Drug Fund. In an English context, we have said that individual patients who are benefiting from medicines through the Cancer Drug Funds will continue to receive those medicines. So we have, but as I say, we see that very much as an English decision about the Cancer Drug Fund. In terms, obviously you have been debating this issue about access to new innovative medicines. There's discussion in Scotland, obviously, of different funds. We have found the Cancer Drug Fund, I would say, useful. We're undergoing certain types of valuation of it, but we see it very much as an English thing, and we'd be happy to share experiences of the CDF, But in terms of what impact that might have on Scottish patients, very interested to hear your views. I understand it is an issue that is debated in Scotland quite significantly.
I think that's interesting. So I wasn't sure about patients currently benefiting from the cancer drugs, and you've clarified that rule as far as England's concerned. So there is a possibility that English patients could still benefit from that, while Scottish patients are still not getting those particular drugs into the future, if we don't have a cancer drugs.
We have said that we are keen to make sure that individuals who are currently benefiting from that medicine in England is continuing. I think we set that out in the consultation document. It's one of the possibilities. We have actually debated, we have said that the primary focus of VBP will be new medicines, but there is a question about whether any existing medicines would be assessed through a value-based pricing process, through the VBP assessment. And one of the debates is whether there are any medicines that are currently available through the CDF that might be assessed under the VBP process.
Yes, that last comment's very interesting.
Yes.
So it isn't just new substances, it may be, hasn't been decided yet. I mean, I think there is still a huge amount of uncertainty which we are trying to grapple with as a committee. Just on the last discussion with my colleague Nanette Milne, of course, we have a rarer drug fund. We have the IPTR system, the Individual Patient Treatment Request System, which is one of the things this committee is looking at in the light of the Rutledge, Scott and Swainson reports. So we are looking at that. So it is a different system up here. The other thing is, of course, that at the moment, the SMC approves some drugs that are not approved by NICE, and NICE approves some drugs that are not approved by the SMC. So, you know, we haven't got a homogeneous situation across the UK in very many respects. There are significant differences. I'm still trying to grapple with whether, having declared the price under the freedom of pricing, which I understand, the thing then goes through an HTA and now, if we introduce it, a value-based pricing assessment. But if Scotland decides through the SMC that they want to retain something which is related to the patient access scheme, which affects the pricing, in other words, the pricing becomes dependent upon the outcomes, will that still be something that would be open to the SMC, or, you know, would the pricing have to be part of the value-based pricing system?
One point to clarify, we don't expect there to be an HTA assessment and then a value-based pricing assessment. We expect it all to be undertaken as one assessment. Right. So there are kind of additional weightings that you would put in. Now, the current PPRS sets out the provisions for patient access schemes in England and Wales, and these have proved popular. There are quite a large number of them available in England and Wales. They are basically an agreement between a company and the Department of Health with input from NICE. One of the, but we have not said whether such an arrangement for England and Wales will be included in the negotiations. You know, as I say, the issue about PASs is very much a pricing issue, and pricing is one of the things that is for the negotiations. Now, Scotland operates its own PAS system. How that operates in the future would be a question for the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament.
So we would end up with an HTA assessment, which Scotland does as well, but a VBP, which would be NICE. And we would have to wait for that before we would actually be able to go into a PAS if we wanted to. I'm still, so, I'm sorry, I just find this, I'm still not clear on the SMC at the moment operates but within the PPRS system. So there is that system, but we can modify it with a PAS. We will have now a VBP instead of PPRS for new substances, and we will still be able to modify it with a PAS. But we won't have to wait for that VBP to be determined before we negotiate our PAS, if we want to.
So medicine is licensed, it gets its price. SMC can then undertake the assessment as it currently does, and then any debates about PASs that the Scottish Government wants to take through that route is a question for Scotland. It is not how the NICE assessment, which is both sort of a traditional HTA but includes a wider set of factors in it, affects that. It doesn't really affect that timeline because there's the price there, it's the SMC has its role. As I understand the system, I'm not an expert on the Scottish system, the SMC can make its assessment and those arrangements can continue at the determination of the Scottish Government.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, Bob?
Okay, thank you for increasing my confusion here. Because value-based pricing, reserved issue apparently, we're looking at it, there seems to be an information gap, that's why we're delighted we've got you here. But that last comment seems to say, well, okay, NICE will do their HTA and value-based pricing together and they will come out with an approval or otherwise for new drugs in England. Scotland can just continue to do its own thing and completely ignore value-based pricing.
NICE,
is that what you're saying?
NICE does the HTA aspects of the system for England.
Okay.
So, as I say, it's not that, it may well not be that big a change. So NICE's role is very much on the HTA aspects. So just as in the current system, there is freedom of pricing at launch within the context of the PPRS, the SMC makes a set of decisions and recommendations. The medicine may or may not be assessed by NICE because we have a slightly different set of criteria in terms of which medicines go to NICE. Then NICE makes an assessment based on a wider set of factors in a more systematic fashion than it currently does.
Okay, and part of that, which is value-based pricing, who decides the framework for value-based pricing in Scotland?
Pricing, so if it's a pricing debate, so that question about what is the price, sorry, do they have freedom of pricing at launch, is determined by the UK government. The bit of HTA that is about does Scotland spend money on this particular medicine at this particular price is for the Scottish authorities to make the decision on.
Yes. That's not the question I asked you. The question I asked you was who decides, there's a reserved aspect of pricing. This we know. Don't fully understand how it works, I have to admit, but we know there's a reserved aspect of pricing. We know that value-based pricing has been taken forward by the UK government and that aspect of it is reserved. And at some point, someone has to make, not an approval or otherwise, or whether to do patient access or otherwise, forget about all that. Someone has got to decide at some point what the value-based pricing element is of any new drug. And someone has to decide what the modelling work and the measures around that are. Now, does the SMC have the complete freedom to do its own system of value-based pricing if it wishes, to decide what the outcome of that price is, or are they bound by a decision elsewhere? Because right now what you seem to be saying is SMC can just continue to do everything they've always done, don't worry about it. That's not your words, but that's the conclusion that I'm coming to based on what your comments have been. So which bit's reserved?
The bit that I would say classically is reserved is the pricing bit. So SMC cannot say, no, you don't have freedom of pricing in Scotland.
Right, can the SMC say, okay, value-based pricing in Scotland is completely unique to Scotland because we've got our own health and social care system, we've got our own prevalence of a disease, life expectancy, multi-morbidity, all that kind of thing. So we'll decide on value-based pricing all by ourselves, or we'll just ignore it completely. Can they do either of those two things?
The bit, as I said, the PPRS document reflects the issues that are reserved. So Scotland cannot say, no freedom of pricing, you've got to operate profit control in this sort of fashion, you've got to have the following profile for list prices. Those are the aspects of the system that are reserved. So as I said, it relates to the price. However, the debate about given a price is this a good use of Scottish money, is a question for the Scottish authorities, including the SNC.
That bit, no, that bit is crystal clear. I think the bit that's not crystal clear, and we're not going to get any further this morning, I don't think, but the bit that's not crystal clear is what part of, we know the pricing controls and the reserved aspects of that you've listed through, but actually none of that's got anything to do with value-based pricing from what I can see. But we're here to discuss the reserved aspect of value-based pricing and how it impacts in Scotland, and what I'm singularly unable to identify is any aspect of value-based pricing as you've outlined it that's reserved.
There are debates about how we will price new medicines, and the bits that are that are debates about, you know, what is the pricing framework for new medicines, how it fits into the EU Transparency Directive. These are debates which I would say is reserved, and because value-based pricing will be applied to new medicines, how that is priced is affected. But the HTA process, as I say, is a debate for Scotland, reflects Scottish sort of preferences and societal judgments. But the pricing aspects, as I say, so those debates about what is the pricing profile for drugs, for individual drugs, what's, you know, is there a maximum price? Is there a blacklist if the medicine is available to a price higher than the one that is agreed at the UK level? What is availability? Some of those issues are reserved.
Convener, my apologies, you just mentioned about a blacklist if a price is agreed that's higher than the UK level. Could you explain what you mean by that?
There are difficult questions around exactly what is the status of NICE's approval. And in the EU, there are debates about the definition of a blacklist where countries say you cannot have that medicine. Now, in the English system, we basically have a system where NICE says you must have it, and then for medicines where NICE does not say this, it is up for individual commissioning authorities to make those sorts of decisions.
Listen, I really am grappling with this. I think many committee members are feeling their way through this, quite frankly, but thank you for your answers.
Gil?
Confused.com. As I understand it from what you're trying to achieve, or the UK government's trying to achieve, is look at the provision of new medicines over a period. In other words, maybe expensive at the start, but because of the impact over a person's life, there's savings in that, so it may be approved. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Right.
So the value-based pricing, the HTA assessment aspect,
yeah.
Is looking at the savings to the system over the life and the cost to the system over their life.
So that I've got it right, not an expensive drug. If it's £30,000, maybe expensive now, but the new system, £30,000 now, but over the piece, what it saves, the health service, the individual, the impact on communities, impact on individual, that's part of the value-based pricing method. Have I got that right? Have I got it? Is that the right kind of?
I would say the value-based pricing method takes the current price and looks at the benefits over the course of an individual's life, and then makes an assessment on, is that price worth it, given these broader set of issues.
This is the bit that I struggle with. If this system is based on measurements on what happens to someone in England with a different system, the way that we do business here is entirely different, where, for instance, that we are endeavouring to spend money up front in the exact same way that you've described. So our system's somewhat different from the energy that we're putting in and the money that we're spending up front in preventative spend is different. but the decision on the drugs is going to be based on an English model where we have no, in Scotland, we have no input into it. How do you evaluate what happens specifically here in Scotland compared to what happens in a different model? You could be talking about Hong Kong and coming up with a model in Hong Kong, and then it may sound ridiculous, but it could be modelled on somewhere else and brought into the UK, which doesn't fit our way of operating. I'm not talking about the diseases. Clearly, there's more particular diseases in Scotland. We are very good at being bad at health, understand that. But what I'm saying is the systems are entirely different, the impacts on people, but that won't be measured, as I understand it, on what you've described here. All that is reserved.
This is where it comes down again to the distinction between the pricing part of the system and the HTA aspect of the system. So the HTA aspect of the system is taken forward by NICE in England and presumably by SMC in Scotland, and they can therefore assess, what is the appropriate impact, how do you appropriately value the price that has already been given by the company based on the system that they are dealing with. So, if this is the wish of the Scottish Government and Scottish Parliament, SMC can take account of social care system in Scotland when it makes its assessment. But that is a decision for you guys.
I think we have, we'll be able to reflect all of this in our report, I think. But I think for so long now, the value-based pricing has been suggested as some sort of silver that was going to cure all of the issues that we may, this is what we're waiting on, the tablets from the Mount and whatever. And, I think the evidence that we've had with the access to medicine, there's no easy decisions here. So we'll reflect this evidence, I think, in our final report. And can I thank you very much for being with us here this morning. We look forward to your final conclusions and a greater understanding of how they will impact on the Scottish scene. Thank you very much. Can I suspend at this point? And we're moving into private session. Thanks.